Hey everybody, this is Deborah Richmond, and we're going to be talking about the quilt behind me. This is a scrap quilt that I've been working on. This was an attempt to use up my scraps. I love scraps. I have lots of fabric and lots of scraps, but there comes a time when I feel the need to get rid of some. And so this quilt was, we were at that point, this quilt was a good way for me to get rid of a lot of my scraps and use them in something that is really creative. Now this is a quilt that really doesn't have a pattern. This is something I saw on Pinterest. I saw a couple of these very similar, and I thought, you know, this is something I want to do. What I decided to do was this particular pattern, because I had a lot of scraps of fabrics that I just haven't used in a really long time. So some of my fabrics are older, and I want to get rid of them. There hasn't been a need for that particular print. Maybe the print is too big, maybe it's too bright, maybe it's just a style that's just too old for what I'm doing these days. When you've quilted for 30 years, that does tend to happen. I'm not going to lie, some of the fabrics in this particular quilt are from the early 90s. But they're cotton, so they're still really good. They're just not going to wear out, and so it's time to put them in a quilt. So let me show you how this goes together. Now you'll see by the pattern behind me that it looks like we have squares because of the ways I've laid the blocks. But the blocks themselves are very, very simple. They are simply one unit that is blocks that are strips that are on a diagonal. And so it makes the sewing and cutting of this quilt extremely easy, but it gives you just a little more of a complex look because it's on a 45-degree angle. So first of all, the first thing you do is you find the scraps you want to use and you start cutting them into different size strips. So here are my strips. Now for my quilt, I've gone ahead and used different size strips, some of them widths. Some of them are 2 inches, some of them are 2.5 inches, some of them are a little bit smaller. Most of them are not bigger than 2.5 inches. I think that way it gives me a nice pattern. If you use different widths of strips, you get a more random look to the quilt itself. So you get more of a kind of a wonky look to it. I really like that. Now if you want something that's much more uniform, then you would use strips that are all exactly the same width, and that will give you a very nice uniform look to the squares that you see forming here. Now the other thing that you need to know too is that this quilt is very good for strips that are very long. It works best for cutting if you have strips that are at least 12 inches long, and frankly, you know, you can have them 30 inches long even, and it's still going to give you a nice piece of fabric that you're going to be then cutting from. The reason why longer works really well is because we are going to be cutting on the diagonal, and so if we have a lot of fabric to cut into, what we end up with is less waste. And so since the idea is to use up our scraps, then I don't want to create more scraps by having some that's waste. So the way that you cut down on that is to have longer strips that you're sewing together before you begin to cut. So very simply, how you start cutting this is you put the strips together. Once you get the strips together, you give them a good press, and then it's all in your ruler. Now I'm using just a regular old 6.5-inch quilter's ruler that has different angles on it. We're going to really need these angles on this end of the ruler that are 45 degrees, the lines that you see. Your quilting ruler probably has these lines on it, but if you're using a ruler that doesn't have these angled lines on it, you're going to need to get one that does. And I'll give you some information in the notes below on where you can order one that has the lines on it. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down. These are the 45 degrees, and I want to lay them on the quilt. Here we go. I always have to kind of turn that around a few times. I'm laying the angles that I see on the ruler right on the edge of my fabric. You can see it's going to give me that cut that I'm looking for that's on the 45-degree angle. I'm going to make sure, I'm not going to cut way out on the corner because this isn't going to be enough for me to get a 6.5-inch block yet. So I'm going to slide it in just until I can see there's at least 6.5 inches here, and that's where I will start. So let's start right here. I'm going to go ahead and just cut right on that line. So we get a nice crisp edge. Now because I'm using 6.5-inch blocks, I did that purposely because that's how wide my ruler is. It makes it really easy for me to just cut without having to do a lot of fussy placing of the ruler. I place it right on the edge. It is 6.5 inches, so I go ahead and cut. Here we're going to start here. So you can see that we have a short side here. This is the side we're going to look at as we're cutting. So you can see that as I'm working on this particular block, we're going to be cutting this angles off, and this is waste. We can use this in other projects. It's another scrap. You can also see that if we had a lot more strips sewn together, this strip would be longer and we would get several cuts out of it before we're wasting another end. So that's why I say longer strips, and actually sewing as many of them together as you can for a nice big piece of fabric is the thing to do. Let me make my last cut here, 6.5 inches. I'm placing it right on the side, using this side for my edge, and now you can see that I do have my block. You can see this one does have different widths of strips, so that's going to give me a lot of different interest and movement in the quilt. Another thing that I want to mention too is that this is great for using up those fabrics that you have a little bit more bigger pieces of because you want those long strips. But if you have smaller pieces and you still want to use them, you can. I had some that were more 6 inches in length, not really the longer lengths that I wanted. So what I did is I would sew them together and I would use them as a strip. So I'll show you how that looks, and you can try that and see what you think. This particular block I've done that quite a bit with. You will see that this particular line here, this strip, has several different fabrics in it that are all in the blues and the brown colors. This one here also is 2 different fabrics, and these are very different in color. So you get this really stark line here, which I like, and then this one has several pieces in it. So you can try different things. You can go with all blue strips together. You can vary it quite a bit, and you get a lot more random look into the piece itself. I like to do that. I like those types of pieces because I think when you look at a quilt, it makes your eye continue to move as you're looking through the pattern. Just something that's one of the things I like to do. So there you have it. This is a really nice way to use up a lot of those scraps that you have so that nothing goes to waste, and then you can cut down on your scraps so you can feel good about cutting into more new fabrics the next time you make a quilt. Thanks for joining me.
And be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can do so here by clicking the subscribe button. That way you'll find out about new videos as they become available.
No!